Episode number 97 with Jonathan Little. Welcome to the Heads Up Poker Podcast. This is Steve Barton, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your tweets, your emails, your reviews on iTunes. I just got another 5-star review last week. I love reading those. Love the sharing. I love every week I log on and I just see more and more people tuning in, and it puts a smile on my face, you know? It puts that cherry on top of my sundae. I can see that you guys are seeing the value in the Elliott Rowe tapes. Several of you bought Alex's book last week, as did I. And I'm glad you're getting something out of this show, because you're the reason that I'm doing it. We've got two guests this week, none other than Jonathan Little and my Aussie friend, student, and one-time horse, Chris Green. So thank you guys for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. You, Jonathan, this year you cashed 5 times at the WSOP, and you are a total rock star in the poker world. You've won many 1K to 10K entry tournaments. You've written books with some of the best players in the world. I watched you do a seminar with Phil Hellmuth. You've got your own weekly Poker Hand podcast. How the hell are you? What's your latest project?
I am doing great. My latest project, I guess I have 2 projects that are, well, in the process / just got wrapped up. I just finished a new book called Bluffs, where I go through 18 situations where a lot of amateur players simply do not bluff, and they certainly should be. So you can check that out at jonathanlittlpoker.com/bluffs. And then I have a new poker coaching site at pokercoaching.com. And there we have interactive quizzes where you can quiz yourself, and then it goes through and tells you how I would play each of these scenarios and why I do not like the answers that you give that are maybe not so good. So it's a really good way to learn how to play poker in an interactive way. Another part of that, pokercoaching.com, is a weekly homework question, actually a monthly homework question. Usually it's a pretty big question. Like, for example, everyone folds to you on the button on the first hand of a $1,500 buy-in World Series of Poker event. The players in the blinds are middle-aged males who seem to be recreational. We have our standard 150 big blind starting chip stack. What is our raising range and why? And then, how do we play after the flop, given our range on various boards? So it's a big question, but it is a once-a-month thing. The students answer those questions. Then we have a webinar. It usually takes 2 or 3 hours, and I go through all of the students' homework questions, or through their answers, and we try to find holes in their game so that they can improve. And so far, it's been very popular.
That's awesome. Okay, so that question right there. So was that the question for this month? You got 2 guys, first hand of the tournament, middle-aged males. They don't necessarily look professional. Maybe they have played some poker. And what's our raising range on the button?
That is not the most recent question, but it is one of the questions that was posted in the past. Figure that would be one of the more easy ones to discuss if we want to discuss it. But
okay, yeah, let's see.
It depends on what they think of you. If they think you are going to be, well, given we think they're recreational, it really doesn't matter so much what they're thinking right off the bat. So I'm probably going to be opening a somewhat generic range. Some of the students replied I would be raising any 2 cards. Other students replied I would be very tight because stealing the 75 chips is not worth anything. And clearly, some of those people are wrong, right? Because you don't want to be either really tight or really loose.
Yeah.
And really, it works out just raising something like 65 or 70% of hands, not doing anything too ridiculous, but at the same time, not being overly tight.
Yeah. So we're folding our total crap, like 9-2 and 8-5 offsuit and stuff like that. But I'm imagining a range here, something like 5-6 suited plus suited 1-gappers from 8-6 suited and above, all broadways, all aces, probably all kings, and then maybe 2-gappers, suited 2-gappers, like a Jack 8 plus.
Well, so given our very deep stack and the fact that we're in position, I'd probably be going a little bit wider than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But not a whole lot wider.
Okay.
And one thing also worth mentioning is that there's not any necessarily correct answer in this spot, but at the same time, you can really pinpoint holes in players' games when they type up effectively an essay and send it in, because the players who are saying things like stealing the 75 chips doesn't really matter, so I'm going to be tight. That is a mindset flaw that can be fixed, and once the players fix these flaws in their game, they can sort of break out of their shell of, well, those players are just way too tight aggressive. Or the players who say, I want to be raising any 2 cards because I'm on the button.
Yeah.
Well, that's a little bit too maniacal. And
yeah.
being able to go through each student's answer and find out how they're thinking and why, that allows me as the coach to plug the leaks in their games.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. What were you going to say, Chris? I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, yeah. There's obviously some value there with thinking that the 75 isn't worth a ton at that point, but not to the point that you're just not opening. Like, against those 2 plays, I think you're right, like opening 65-70% there every time, until they kind of give you a reason not to.
The thing is that you're not just trying to win the 75 chips. I think that's the problem that a lot of people think. They think I'm either trying to steal the blinds or I'm trying to play for my whole stack. And in reality, we're going to get called a lot of the time. We're going to see a flop. We're going to play a pot in position. And we're probably going to end up winning a 4 or 5 or 6 big blind pot a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And it's not like you either get stacked or stack a guy, right? It's not like we're playing for our whole 150 big blind stack every single hand. And that is what some people think. They think that if I get top pair, I'm going with it. And I really don't want to be playing king 4, because if I get my king 4 on a king 7-3 flop, well, I'm putting my whole 150 big blinds in the spot.
Yeah.
And I mean, if that's how they think, then yeah, you probably want to be folding the king 4. But if you realize you're trying to play small and medium pots and just slowly chip up, that's generally going to be a very good strategy early in poker tournaments. And also, sometimes you do flop 2 pair and 3 of a kind, and you end up stacking people.
Yeah, and you're trying to learn about your opponents too. How are they going to react when I do this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of value in just playing pots early in an intelligent way. And one thing that I think a lot of my students have already figured out is that we're not trying to go broke early in the tournament. And it's okay to just check behind with top pairs sometimes and check behind with middle pairs.
Yeah. Well, Chris, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself? When we met each other, has it been a year yet? I feel like it's almost been a year.
Oh, it'd be close, yeah. It'd be maybe about November last year.
I think so, yeah. I think I just had my birthday, so my birthday's in the middle of November, so yeah.
I feel like it's been a lot of similar stories with how my poker journey, I guess, has gone. It was just one of those kind of coincidental things. Found you on Twitter and checked out the podcast, and then checked out some of the coaching rates, and they just seemed great. And at the time, I didn't have a coach. I'd done some coaching before with another guy in the States, and yeah, I thought it'd be a good time to get back into it. I was looking at trying to learn some more about MTTs, and I'd primarily been playing 6 max cash.
Yeah.
And yeah, I thought it was something. I hadn't really played MTT seriously. I'd kind of played them just for fun in the past, and I didn't really know a whole lot about what I was doing. I thought it was definitely something I needed to tighten up.
Yeah.
And it all kind of worked out well.
And you are you're a fan of Jonathan's podcast.
Yeah, I've got subscribed to that and getting the YouTube updates. So there was one, yesterday? I think it was.
Yeah, I post a lot of videos on YouTube.
Yeah.
You've really got your podcast streamlined. I got to admit, Jonathan, it's pretty awesome. I mean, the format that you have is genius, because you can sit down on a Saturday just from. I'm a fan of efficiency and production, and the way you have your podcast formatted, it's 6 to 10 minutes long, and it's about one hand, and you could sit down on a Saturday and record 2 months worth of podcasts. It's just genius, man. I love it, and it's so entertaining and good to listen to, and it's a great way to get your product out there. Well done, sir. Well done.
Well, thank you. People can check that out at they can search Weekly Poker Hand on the iTunes or wherever they get their podcast, or they can watch the videos on YouTube or at jonathanlittlepoker.com/WPH. But you're right. I actually spent the last day or two recording some of them for the next month or so. And I mean, I actually just got back from a vacation in Europe, and also I commentated the Global Poker League for 2 weeks. And so during that month-long period, I didn't really do much. And besides those things, I relaxed during the vacation and commentated 12 hours per day during the Global Poker League. So during that time, being able to record the stuff ahead of time, like you said, is very beneficial. I'm a big fan of like doing all the work in short periods of time. That way you can enjoy life, because if you're constantly working and maybe not enjoying your time to the maximum, you're probably messing up somewhere along the way.
I could completely agree. Yeah, I got this from Alex. I think I already kind of knew it beforehand, but when he told me it really solidified it. He's like, when you're married and you have a family, he's like, work all you want for 6 days, but make sure you get that one day where you and your wife do something together where it has absolutely nothing to do with playing cards. And that was really good advice. Did you go out there with your wife, or were you by yourself for your vacation?
No, so the first 2 weeks I was by myself in Malta doing the commentary for the Global Poker League, and then the next 2 weeks my wife came out and we traveled around Europe a little bit.
Nice. Good for you. Good for you. How long have you guys been married now?
About a year and a half, give or take a little bit.
Okay. I got you by about 6 or 7 months. I'm a newlywed too.
Nice. We're set to have a baby in about 2 months, so that's going to be.
That was going to be my next question. Do you have a bun in the oven? You do.
We do have a bun in the oven, so I'm going to try to take care of all my weekly poker hand videos for the next 2.5 years. Over the next.
Good luck for that. Maybe you can record one with him on the podcast.
Yeah, that's true.
Is it a boy or a girl? Do you know yet?
It's going to be a boy. I do actually stream on Twitch sometimes, and I imagine I'll probably be doing some late night streams with me playing poker or watching some poker games or something like that with a baby on me, so that'll be fun.
Yeah. Right on. Good for you. Good for you. Good for you. Well, do you I got a question for you. It's kind of a weird one. And but you've had so much time at the poker tables live, and how long have you been playing? I mean, you got Hendon Mob all the way back to like 06. When did you start playing full time?
I started playing full time in 2004, so 2 years before I turned 21. I guess I started playing when I was 18, kind of became a professional when I was 19, and then started playing live poker when I was 21.
Okay.
Now I'm I guess 31. So yeah, it's been a long time.
What's your most memorable moment that you've had at the poker table? Something that you couldn't believe you saw, or maybe it was a hand that you won, or we're going to tease it, so don't answer just yet. Take a minute to think about it. But the most memorable moment that you've had at the poker table in all your years sitting down. But first, I'm going to tell you about Elliot Rowe. And he's a poker mindset coach. He puts out MP3s. You can listen to them before you play. And the idea is, we all know how important it is to have a warm-up routine. And what better way to have a warm-up routine than to listen to a meditation tape about the exact kind of poker that you're about to play right before you play. Get your subconscious right before you play. You can get an Elliot Rowe, a free MP3. It's a tilt buster. It's only 7 minutes long. Try it before you go play the next time. Click on the link in the show notes, or go to HeadsUpPoker.Poker. Click on the Support Us tab, and you'll find your free link right down there. He's got MP3s for live cash games, live tournaments, online cash games, online tournaments, sit and goes, final tables, bankroll leaks. He's got it all. So go check it out, HeadsUpPoker.Poker. Click on the Support Us tab and go down and get your free MP3. Okay, Jonathan, your most memorable moment.
Well, so when you initially asked the question, I was actually thinking, man, I really don't remember much about playing poker, because every day is... I was actually talking to my wife about this because I played a little bit online, and I had a bad session one Sunday whenever we were in Europe, and she said that it's amazing how you can be relatively unhappy at the end of the day after everything goes incredibly poorly. But then the next day, you just wake up happy as can be, ready to go again.
Yeah.
Because I actually don't remember the big wins or the big losses or anything like that too much, because they just don't matter at the end of the day. You realize that after playing for a long time, that the swings are somewhat irrelevant. So you just show up, play your best, go home, and that's that.
It's the long run.
It is. I suppose the most memorable hand, though, was from, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago at the World Series of Poker. I don't remember exactly which year. I was having a relatively rough summer. And at the end of the summer, I think I had something like $30K left in cash on me. which I was playing a lot of cash games that summer, and I was winning in cash games, but just lost all the tournaments. I've had two summers at the World Series of Poker with no cashes despite playing everything. So those kind of things happen. You can't let that bother you. If you look at every good professional poker player who plays primarily no limit hold'em, you will see if they've been playing 10 years, there's going to be 1 or 2 summers where they didn't do too good. So anyway, this was that summer. Right at the end, I think I was playing 100, 200, 400 no limit at Bellagio. So playing quite big.
Okay.
And
this is cash?
Cash games, yeah.
100, 200, 40. Okay, so there was a straddle. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, so I think I was in for 40K for the buy-in, and which is generally a lot for me. And I had chipped up to something like 60K, and then I ended up playing this big pot where I raised under the gun with pocket nines, this really tight player, min re-raised from third position. So I made it something like 1,200. He made it 2,700, something ridiculous. So I called, of course, with pocket nines. It came Jack 9-3.
Perfect.
We ended up getting it all in for the whole 60K. I was very, very confident he had exactly aces or kings. And then the board ran out. It came Jack 9-3, 10, queen. So pocket kings got there and pocket aces lost. So
he hadn't showed his hand yet.
Right. You don't show your hands in tournaments or in cash games. You don't show your hand until something happens. So he looks disappointed. I show my hand. He says, "Nice hand, you got it." Tries to muck, and then his opponent, or not his opponent, the guy next to him says, "Oh no, you win." He's like, "I don't win. What do you mean?" He looks at his cards again, tries to muck him. The guy takes the cards out of his hands, tables them for him, and he has the pocket kings.
Oh god!
So he could not read his hand properly, and I was pretty unhappy about it. So
god!
That was a nice way to end that summer.
You had to walk away at that point, right? You didn't keep playing?
No, I got up and left.
Yeah, I can't imagine it. Oh my god!
I got on an airplane and went home.
Yeah, I don't blame you one bit. I would have done the same thing. Probably kicked a couple cans out the door on my way out. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's a pretty good one. I didn't expect one that good. Jesus.
Oh, well, when you play long enough, you don't remember much, but the ones you do remember, they're often quite fun.
They're stingers.
We were talking about that last week at a live cash game. We were just, what's the player's obligation? Someone was asking if you're the other player there, so not the player with the kings, but the player next to him, and you see he's going to muck his hand. Do you say something? We were asking that. We were talking about that around the table. Saying, do you say something, or do you leave it completely up to that player?
Well, so I am a big fan of just having generally good etiquette, and I think good etiquette in that spot does not necessarily mean you're trying to make the most money, because clearly you'd rather have a guy who can't read his hand with 120K in front of him than pretty much anyone else at the table. Yes. So if you only care about making money, well, then sure, you would for sure tell that guy, because you don't care about etiquette. There's nothing against the rules to tell the guy that he wins the hand. So in theory, that's what you should do. I would not tell the guy, because in my mind, if the other player's in the pot with the guy and his opponent can't read the hand, then he deserves to win. Yes. So I would definitely not say anything. It's not... It sure feels out of line when the other guy says it, but I understand why someone would say it, because clearly you want that guy to have the money.
Yeah. I learned that one the hard way.
I was going to say, it boils down to, are you a jerk or not? If you're a jerk, then tell him.
Yes. I learned that one the hard way. This was probably a decade ago, and we were playing 1-3 limit or something like that when I was just starting out. No, it must have been longer than that. Anyways, same sort of thing. The guy just couldn't read his hand. They both actually had the same hand. They both had king jack for the straight, and the guy, I think he thought he was going for a pair, but he didn't realize that he hit the gut shot or whatever. The other guy bet. I think he must have called, or they both checked. I can't remember what the details were, but they split the pot, and I was the asshole next to him that said, "Just flip over your hand, dude." And so then he flips over his hand, and he split the pot, and the other guy was so mad. And that's when I realized what a dick I was, and then I've never done it since. Lesson learned. That was the hard way to learn a lesson.
Well, so what is the lesson? That you don't like other people getting angry at you?
You know, maybe that's an interesting point. Maybe that goes a little bit deep into my psyche here, but I suppose it's none of my business. You know, the hand is between
the table.
Well, see, now you're just playing devil's advocate.
Well, I am, but you always have to play devil's advocate. You always have to ask yourself, why am I doing what I am doing, and does it actually make logical sense? And I mean, I already said that I'm never telling anyone whenever their opponents muck the losing hand. You know, I'm just keeping quiet. But I think that if you did not care at all about what other humans thought about you, then I see nothing wrong with doing it. It's kind of like slow rolling a guy, right? I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with slow rolling a guy.
Yeah.
But you know, if you do it, some people are going to think you're a jerk.
Yeah. It does seem kind of like a dickish move when you to slow roll a guy, but you know, maybe you're right. You might be hitting onto something here. That maybe it's that I want the players at the table to like me, and I would rather that they not dislike me. I don't know if that says something about my personality, or if it's more that I know I can win more money by them liking me. I'm not sure.
I think in general, you probably win more money in the short term when people don't like you.
Interesting.
Because they'll be tilty and angry. Like, for example, I mean, in that scenario where the guy got me to get up and leave the table, and he gave the weakest player at the table $120K.
Oh,
how is that not bad for him in the short run?
Oh, that's a very good point. Yeah.
But in the long run, what happens if people don't like you is it makes poker less enjoyable for everyone, and they're going to remember these bad experiences. They're not going to play. Maybe they want to kill you or something in the parking lot. Who knows?
Jump you and take your roll.
Yeah, I mean, there are all these other things that may come into play. So you always have to look at all sides of it. But I generally do want people to like me. I'm trying to sell poker books. So I try to be a good human and not really mess up anyone too bad. But maybe that's just me being maybe I don't have the killer instinct that I should.
Good point. Good point. Well, Chris has a few hands that he'd like to go over with you.
All right.
All right, so I've got a couple hands just from playing the. We've got a live cash game. So I'm in Canberra, and the poker scene is pretty dead. They've just reopened the casino. They run a 5-5 most nights. Buy-ins capped at 500, and 1-2 mainly Thursday through Saturday. The problem with 1-2 is you capped at 50 bigs, so it's a flat 100 buy-in, no less, no more. Mainly to try and push people towards the 5-5, which is 2-5.
And tell them the rake on those games.
Oh yeah, so the 1-2 is 10% capped at $10, and the 5-5 is 5% capped at 20.
What do you think of
That's
that,
a big
Jonathan?
rake.
Yeah. Okay.
So I know in New York City where I live, they have these underground games where they take 5% uncapped, and there's one winner in the game, period. Between anyone, like everyone who's ever played there's only been one guy who's won over the course of something like 10 sessions. And that's just because the rake gets everyone. So the rake's too high.
Yeah, so like the rake, especially at the 1-2, is not great. You're playing with your 50 bigs there. The only difference I found playing here against playing in the States was like how frequent is tipping over there? It's per hand, isn't it?
In America, typically people tip maybe $1 per hand when they win, but at the same time, they're not getting raked to death. So
yeah.
If you're getting raked to death, it's going to make me sound like a jerk now. You almost have to assume that the casino is paying the dealers very well.
I would think so.
And you should probably not be tipping much of anyone there because, and if people give you attitude because you do not tip, say the casino is raking way more than they need to, I am assuming it's up to them to take care of it.
Yeah, and that's a slight difference, and it could be why they justify the rake being so high here is the fact that when they're not allowed to take tips.
So they are paid well.
Yeah.
They are paid well. Yeah. Okay. Oh,
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Good.
Yeah, so if they're not allowed to take tips, I mean, then that takes every time you pay the rake, just assume $1 of that would have gone to the dealer. Even then, so say it's like $10, it's still like compared to an America casino, maybe they're taking 5 at 1-2 at the most, and in most reasonable places. So that would make it into a $6 rake out the door with tip. So if you're paying 10, it's still a larger amount. But anyway,
still high. Yeah. All right. So I've got a couple of hands here. So like I said, the scene here is kind of dead. The best idea for me to play live is probably to travel to either Sydney or Melbourne, um, which isn't too far. They've just got some good games. Sydney especially, you can go play a 2-3, which is deeper, so you can buy in for 500. So you're sitting about 160 bigs to start, which is a great. I think I prefer playing deep, obviously. And you've got just a very similar player pool. And there's just a lot of bad players just buying in for 500, buying in for 200 at that table. It's great. I think there's a lot of money there. But
What
down here,
what hands are your what games are your hands from?
so they're going to be from 1-2.
Okay.
So we've got one. All right, I'll start with this one. So we had 1-2. It's a full ring. This is something similar that Jonathan touched on in one of his videos about limping. So this year I've been trying to play more live, and obviously it's a very different game, and kind of adopting a bit of a limping strategy. So the hand was we got dealt Jack 3 of spades on the button. Stacks about 100. We face two limpers before us from second position and the hijack.
Okay, so second, how many handed are you?
9.
9-handed. Okay, so two limps in front of you.
Yep.
Okay.
And
So
dealt Jack 3 of spades on the button. The blinds are pretty passive. They'll probably complete. There's very unlikely they're going to really raise here unless it's absolute premium, which just seems to be the case in these games anyway. And I know, Jonathan, you talked about these are kind of good hands to raise it up. I was watching one of the webinars talking about the live 1-2 game and saying raising in these spots with the junky, Jack 3, King 3s, those kind of suited hands. In this case, so this is a hand I wasn't even involved with, so I'm actually in the small blind for this.
Okay, wait, I'm confused. What happened?
Yeah, I'm confused. I'm kind of running this. So this is a hand I was watching, and it's actually a hand I just wanted opinion on the spot, because this guy at the table talking for a good 10-15 minutes after the hand about this spot, and I think it's a pretty standard spot, but I was curious about the what you guys think about
Chris,
this one.
hang on just one sec. Okay, so were we on the button or the small blind?
Yeah, the hand's played from the button. We're not involved in this hand. We're sitting in the small blind. So we end up
okay, so this Jack 3 suited is not you.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
not me though.
Okay,
I'm just really curious about the spot.
That
Sorry
explains
about
a lot. Okay.
that.
Okay.
Curious about the spot. So
Okay, so we'll call him Hero. What is Hero stack?
yeah, Hero's got 100. He's got 100 in his stack, so just full stacked.
Okay, two limpers. What do they have?
Two limpers that have. We're playing with 100 effective stack. So the first limper's got 100. The next one has about 60.
Okay. And then what are the blinds?
And then it gets. They've got 100 each.
Okay.
So it's pretty early on in the night. They've just opened the 1-2 table.
Okay. All right. Now we're square. Okay. So
sorry about that.
two
It's all over the
limps.
place.
Two limps. Air quotes here. Hero has
Yep.
Jack of spades, 3 of spades. The second hero, I guess, is in the small blind, and then there's another player in the big blind. Everyone's got about 100 except for the second limper, which has 60. Okay. All right. We're square.
All right, we're good. Sorry about that. All right, so button limps here with Jack 3. I don't mind it. I don't think it's necessarily a spot where he has to raise. And then the blind's complete.
Okay.
So we
So
got
in
5.
this spot, if I had the Jack 3 suited, I certainly would have either folded or raised.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think the Jack 3 suited is just a little bit too weak, and if I did raise, it'd probably be on the bigger side at 1-2. I actually wrote a book called Strategies for Beating Small Stakes Poker Cash Games. Also have one for tournaments.
I've read your tournaments
And
one.
for
It's
those
really
books,
good.
for those books, I went and I actually played the small stakes games. For the $1-2 game, I went and played at Borgata. There was a Bellagio World Poker Tour event going on, and during my spare time, I sat there and played 1-2, and ended up winning something like $800 in the 4 or 5 days that I played. And it was just from stealing a lot of pots that didn't belong to me. And then when it was obvious my opponents liked their hands, just fold. So, and in this spot, I don't really think Jack 3 suited is good enough to call. And for that reason, I would fold it the majority of the time. The main time I'm raising is when I think the limpers are particularly weak and will fold to a somewhat big raise. And this is an exploitable play where I'm not making a $20 raise or an $18 raise with my aces, but I am going to make a bigger raise with the Jack 3 suited because I think people are going to fold way more often to the big raise than a raise to something like 12.
Okay. And there's no drop, no flop, no drop here, right? If you don't see a flop, then they don't rake it, right, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay.
One other thing worth mentioning is when you are playing a lot of limped pots, you are going to end up winning more small pots. And the way you beat a big rake is by winning big pots not very often. Whereas if you play a lot of pots and you win these small pots over and over and over, the rake is going to get you. So that's one important note. Whenever the rake is big, you want to play very tight.
You want to play tight, and
Very
you want
tight,
to play a
very aggressive when the rake is
$300
big.
pot once every hour and a half instead of $10 pots every 5 minutes.
Right, if that's possible, yeah.
All right. So we head to the flop with five limpers essentially.
Okay, 10
and it's
bucks in the pot.
$10 in the pot. Yep. King 4 3.
Now it's probably $8 in the pot.
Yeah. King 4 3, 2 spades.
Which ones are the? Oh, it'd have to be the king 4. Okay.
So the blinds check. So the first limper from second position, he leads out for 10, into 10. And the hijack, who's got about 60 in his stack, raises to 30.
And then it's on air quotes hero.
Yeah, then comes a hero on the button with Jack 3 of spades, so he's got bottom pair flush draw. And this is a spot which I feel online is very, for the most part, it feels very standard. But it seemed to kind of confuse a lot of people because he just ships here for $97, sorry.
Yeah, I would have folded.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So yeah, this is one I'm curious about because online, when I was doing some cash game coaching before, I know there was a lot of talk about, more so with the flopping the middle pair, so on say like a king 7-4 board where you have 7x of spades in that spot, then you can kind of check raise, ship it, and you're getting in with such good equity a lot of the time. In this spot with the king 4-3 flop, you get it there, someone calls you off with king X, you're still flipping at worst. You're flipping at worst with most call ranges. Against a set, obviously, it's upsetting. You might run into ace X, the spades. I think for the most part, you're flipping at worst.
Well, okay, so hero shoves for 97. The blinds are probably not interested, so they're probably folding unless they're slow playing a big hand. Then you got a guy that let out for 10. It's going to cost him another 90 if he wants to see a turn in a river. The guy that moved all in for 60, we're going to assume that he's committed his stack. I don't know that you're going to get the odds here that you need because you might get heads up with the guy that let out for 30, and that's
Short
it.
Stack. All right. If he's full stack there, he raises to 30. So he leaves him with like 67 behind after you've shipped into a pot of what would be 20, 30, so it's 50, almost 150. It's about 146.
I don't know. I feel.
How do you see the spot?
Tell me what you think, Jonathan. I feel like. I mean, he's showing a lot of strength here. A guy let out for 10, and then he's putting in half his stack. I think he's got a strong hand, a better draw than you have a lot of the times.
We'll slow down. So better draw. You're beating the better draw, so you have a pair.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. I meant like a higher flush draw. But you're ahead of that. Yeah, you're right. And you got a lot of his outs.
You still had
That's a good point.
So I just quickly ran the range, and that I assume the guy's going to have pretty much all kings, all reasonable kings, and then flush draws, and then the few premium hands like pocket fours, 4 and 4-3, and you're roughly flipping, like you said. So against that guy, you're roughly flipping. The problem is that you will sporadically get called off by the other guy. Whenever he does have a very premium hand, notice that he could just have pocket kings or the other set. So that does cut down your equity some. But maybe it's still fine to get it all in and just realize you're going to turn some tiny bit of profit.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was an interesting spot because there was a guy at the table who just thought this is always an incorrect play. But given that board, I think and the way that the pre-flop action goes there, I think it's unlikely you're running into kings there. You kind of block threes. The worst set you're really running into for the most part is going to be fours. And again, he flips fours. It just sucks.
Well, I mean, the issue here is that you are effectively calling off with no fold equity, roughly flipping with some dead money in the pot. And you just have to figure out how often someone else is going to wake up one of the hands that you're drawing somewhat thin against. Does that make up for the fact that there is an extra $10 dead in the pot or whatever it is? Or $12, $15 or $16 dead.
I think it's a max of 10, so it should just be 10.
It probably does. So yes. Well, there was a $10 bet on the flop, then there's probably 8 from the pre-flop.
Oh, I thought you were counting the rake.
I don't know. Anyway, you got to figure out if whatever dead money is in there, because you're calling off flipping effectively. You have to figure out if whatever dead money in there makes up for that fact. And at the end of the day, you're probably profiting something like $3 or $4 on average in this pot, and you're flipping for whatever the amount is. So if you care about your bankroll at all, like meaning you don't have an unlimited bankroll or a big bankroll, you should probably shy away from these spots. And if you're just trying to make every single plus EV decision, then you should probably be hopping in.
Okay.
As it stands, he got 2 callers from it, so the second position calls off the rest of his 100, hijack calls off for the rest of his 60, and turn came the spade, and both just mucked immediately.
Well, they didn't have a set then.
So yeah, I think you can rule out set. It was just an interesting spot because it basically came down to the table was talking about it for a good 10-15 minutes, and one guy just couldn't really wrap his head around how it was ever a plus EV decision. I think he was just more thinking of the spot in terms of he just couldn't get his head around wrap his head around. Sorry, whether it's you're ever getting it in good there. He just thought that every time you get called, you're behind, and it was hard to explain. But I like what Jonathan says there about it's a plus EV decision. It's a high variance play. And I think when you're starting with 50 bigs, there's going to be quite a few spots like that. You just don't have you don't have a lot of room to move at 50 bigs until you double up.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, you have to realize that when we are playing these short stacks, whatever edge you have is actually kind of significant. Like whenever you're playing short stacked tournament scenarios with 20 big blinds, often the edges you're looking for are something like 0.1 big blind or more. And here we're probably getting in a spot where we're going to profit 2.5 big blinds at the end of the day. Yeah. You have to risk your whole 50 big blind stack, but it's probably worth it.
Okay.
And like you said, this exact board, King 4-3, is way better than a board like King Queen 3. Because on King Queen 3, you have to be more... well, actually, in the Slent pot, maybe that's not the case. Maybe a board like 8-7-3 you'd be way more concerned about. Because then people could have all the sets in 2 pairs, whereas here there aren't very many sets in 2 pairs available. Yeah. So that makes this particular spot pretty good.
Okay. Huh, that was a good one.
Yeah, I'm a fan of those kind of spots. Like I like those. I play primarily online. This year has been a big goal of mine to be playing more live, and just I find it's a very different game. Steve's come in real handy for that. I played a few tournaments down in Melbourne earlier in the year, and the first kind of live series of tournaments I was playing. It's just very different. Very different game. There's a lot more limping. For the most part, a lot of the recreational players, you do get the feel that they're just afraid to make a big mistake that's going to get shown. The amount of time I feel that's wasted at these 1-2 games, or even the 5-5 game where it gets to a showdown and everyone's being so coy and no one wants to show their hand. I feel like there's a lot of pride. There's a lot more of that in the live game, because online people can run these 3-barrel bluffs, show up with absolute air, and just move on to the next hand, and no one knows any better.
They're worried about what everyone thinks.
Yeah, I mean, live poker is...
Yeah.
I was gonna say live poker is certainly a slower game, and I think you just have to understand that when you are playing live poker. I think a lot of people, when they come from online, get really frustrated early. I mean, there are actually a lot of players who are incredibly good at online poker who have fantastic results in the highest stakes tournaments online who are pretty big losers in live poker tournaments. And the reason is because they can't just sit there and fold every hand for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And, they're used to playing 20 tables online where you're playing a hand all the time, but at the same time, you're actually playing kind of tight. And so they lose their minds when they're playing live poker. They know how to play every pot. They know how to play every hand reasonably intelligently, and they just can't help themselves. So you have to make sure that does not happen to you when you transition to live poker.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something I've been trying to learn, really. Just the other, like, for example, last week I went down. I was playing this in this 1-2 game, and I just sat there for probably folding for like a good hour. It felt like it was just a lot of you're playing 20 hands an hour or something like that. The dealing's quite slow, especially at Canberra. It's probably unusually slow. So if you're going down to Melbourne or Sydney and some of the bigger casinos, it's a lot better. You're playing 20 hands max an hour here, and that's probably a good hour. And yeah, there's just times where you're folding for that hour for the most part. And it's an adjustment.
I was going to say, there's some things you can do to try to speed up the game because it's generally well known that you either make or lose some amount of money every single hand you play on average. So you want to play as many hands as possible. You can make a point to play very quickly. I mean, I know whenever I play, I'm almost certainly the fastest or second fastest player at every live table I play. And also, whenever someone is taking their time, you can make it obvious that you're kind of annoyed that they're taking their time. And then if you're allowed to call the clock on them, call the clocks and then tell the floor man, look, this guy is slowing down the game. He's not playing anywhere near reasonably, like at a reasonable pace. And this is making the game unenjoyable for everyone. And, if you find that the game actually does only play 20 hands per hour, and let's say you think you're going to make, well, let's say, so it's kind of thought that in most reasonable cash games, you'll make about 10 big blinds per hour if they play about 30 hands per hour. So this maybe you'll make 7.5 big blinds per hour. So $15 per hour if you're good, minus some amount of rake, because that's assuming the rake is small. So maybe you're making like $10 an hour or $5 an hour at the end of the day. You have to, or $5 to $10 to $15 per hour. You have to let the floor man know that this is unacceptable, and if it's like this, you're going to lose a customer. And then you got to be willing to vote with your feet. You got to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think they've got a pretty good. They've actually got a pretty good floor guy in there who's lately he's just been calling the clock himself on people. He'll just, because there's only 2 tables to really look over. He'll just come over, and if he sees the action is just holding up, he'll just call clock. He just say 40 seconds. Let's go, get it moving.
Yeah, it's actually in the casino's best interest to play many hands per hour too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can even let the floor man know, like, you're on their side because you think you're better than the players. You're going to make money per hand. Casino makes money per hand, and the casino makes way more money per hand than you do. So you should really be letting the casino know that it's in their best interest to make the game somewhat fast. And yeah, don't be afraid to call the clock. I mean, the problem is that people used to play reasonably fast, and for some reason, I don't know what's been happening. I think people have been watching too much poker on TV, or the people on TV have been acting like idiots. But anyway, call clock on people. Don't be afraid of that. I think it's becoming more and more accepted to call clock on people, and it's okay.
There's definitely a lot of unnecessary tanking.
Yes.
Just
right.
It's frustrating. I'm not sure. Like you said, if it's come from watching it on TV or where it's coming from, but people are just trying to turn every decision into like a life or death decision here. And I get that, for each particular person, the stakes, there might be a change in significance. So $100 to me might be, it might be my week's worth of money or whatever. But still, there was a game the other week. We've had a guy tank for about 5 minutes on what was a really easy call. And he ended up having the clock called on him because he was just sitting there. You would have thought he was playing the main, and there was just real no need for it. It's a 1-2 game. He had a pretty clear decision. Even if it wasn't clear to him, there's no. What are you thinking about for 5 minutes?
Yeah, so, I mean, just call the clock on him is what it amounts to. Another thing I think a lot of live poker players do not necessarily think about is that, You don't have to play. I know that a lot of people want to play poker. They want to go to their local casino and play. But if the rules at your local casino are not good for you, you don't have to play. I mean, like I said, I live in New York, and the only games they have are these underground games that rake a ton. So I don't play. I don't feel like I need to go play because I know the game is either barely profitable or not profitable. And why do I want to go do that? So I spend a decent amount of time now just not playing poker, 2 weeks per month or so when I'm at home. And it works out well because I write books and coach students during that time. But you don't have to play just because the game is available, is what it amounts to.
That's a good point.
And if the game is no good, don't feel like you have to play it.
Yeah, well said.
It sucks. I mean, I wish that wasn't the answer, but
I've had to do that with my
sometimes.
local casino. The tournaments are just they're just not good. They used to be a few years ago, but they since changed the structure, and now they're much, much faster, and they took out a bunch of blind levels, and it's
So this actually happened at my dad's local casino where he lives. He used to go there and play almost every night, and they started doing these things where they had these like loyalty tournaments or something like that. And for some reason, he could not play the loyalty tournaments because they were at a bad time for him. So what they did is to get money for these loyalty tournaments, they would take additional rake from all the other tournaments. And so he's effectively funding this tournament that he's not going to be able to play in. Right. And so he did some math. At the end of the day, the tournament was effectively raking something like 35%. All the tournaments across the board. And of course, if you play the loyalty tournament, you get it back at the end of that time in exchange in some form of equity. But if you're not playing, you're just paying 35% rake. And we talked about it, and he realized he can't beat this 35% rake. And so now he only plays the sporadic big tournament they have like once every 3 months at that specific place. And he wishes he could play there every day, but they've made it such that he can't play there. And he's smart enough to understand that he doesn't have to play every day.
Yeah, if they only make it on Sundays when he wants usually going to the racetrack with his buddies or whatever, then it just doesn't work. Yeah. What other hands do you have, Chris?
So I got another one from a 1-2 where a few of us are deep. It's four-handed.
Okay.
And so we've got Queen of Clubs, Ten of Spades in the small blind.
Okay.
And the action goes to the cutoff folds. So the cutoff makes it 10, button folds. Cutoff's probably the best player at the table. Heads up specialist, just really, really solid player here. Probably the best of the 1-2 in the casino. He opens to 10, button folds. We're in the small blind. Here I call here, and big blind came along.
What are the stack sizes? How much does the cutoff have? How much do you have? And how much does the big blind have?
So about 2 hands before, I was involved with a big pot with cutoff, and I've got about 400.
Okay. And the cutoff has?
Cutoff has about 150.
150, and the big blind?
Big blind would be about 100. He's only sat here for about 6 to 10 hands.
Okay.
And hasn't really played much. He's kind of a rec player. Haven't seen him there before. He just showed up for play a bit of cards and have some fun.
Okay.
So he hasn't played much. Don't really have much of a read on him. Don't love being out of position against this particular player in the cutoff, but we get Queen 10 four-handed. It seems worth a defend in the small blind.
So you're suited, right?
No, off-suited.
Off-suited? I would probably just fold. I know it sounds nitty,
Fold there.
but from out of position with big rake, this is kind of like the definition of a hand that you would perhaps normally play, but facing a 5 big blind raise, even though that is probably the standard raise for these games, from out of position you just have to be really tight.
All right, that probably solves his hand. Because I was gonna say this hand's been bothering me for a bit because I know there's a mistake somewhere in there. I'm just been trying to go over it and over it, trying to work out where exactly, and it could just be fold pre.
Fold pre-flop is often the right answer if your hand is not very good.
Fold pre-flop if your hand is not very good.
Like
That's usually the right answer. I love it.
Right response.
Well said, sir.
That's okay, I know.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm true genius over here.
Moment of insight.
That's fantastic. So yeah, I end up calling. Big blind comes along as well.
Okay.
So go to the flop with pot of $30, and flop the straight comes out king of clubs, nine of clubs, jack of diamonds.
King of clubs, nine of clubs, jack of diamonds. So king, jack, nine with the nine of king and nine of clubs. Okay.
Yep, and we've got the queen of clubs.
So one thing worth mentioning there is see how you just rearrange the board to be high to low. I think that's a very good thing to do. It'll help you think about poker a little bit more clearly compared to if you say like jack 2-3, right? So if you always start high to low all the time, it'll help you think about poker cleanly.
You know where I learned that from,
away
Chris?
from the table.
Where's that?
Jonathan Little.
Well, good.
I was actually watching one of Jonathan's videos the other day, and I realized it's something which I need to start doing. So he was talking about the format of note-taking for these live games. That's something Steve and I have talked about as well. I was doing it when I was playing the tournaments down in Melbourne. So my memory is just, especially for live games, just seems to be frightening.
You're so used to the HUD and just pulling it up and seeing exactly how much everyone has. Yeah.
So I'd be coming to Steve being like, all right, so I think there's a hand. I was in the cutoff or the button, or I know I was definitely playing, and
It drives me up the wall. I'm like, okay, what was your what position were you in? Do you even know what cards you had? I want to talk about this hand. How the hell can we talk about the hand if I don't know what your hand? Okay.
The reason I even started taking notes at the table was because I was going to say I could not remember anything whenever my friends would ask me, like, how'd your session go? What did you do to win money? Or how'd you lose your money? I would just have no clue. And it's no good. So you have to start taking notes. And I actually have a pretty easy way to take notes. You can find it at jonathanlittlepoker.com/notes. There's a video there.
Okay.
That
That's one I used. It was fantastic, actually. So I've got a template now on just on my phone. So I've got I use Evernote, and it's a good little format there. I've just set it up in a table, so now when I play I can just put in some details quickly. They're pretty good about phone rules at this casino, so I can get on there quickly, write it down, and I don't have to be writing a novel, but I can get the details down that I need without having to come back later and try and scratch together the information.
Thank you, Jonathan.
You're welcome. Speaking of using your phone at the table, we actually just released this push fold application that you can use at the table very cleanly and easily. You can find it at jonathanlittlepoker.com/app. It's just APP. And there's a web browser version also if you can want to play with it on your computer or whatever. Or you can find it in the Google or the Android or the iTunes App Store. And it's very easy to use. So you set up your situation. Like say we have 10 big blinds in the cutoff, right? We just got short stacked. Here we are. And it'll display what to push if they fold to you. And so then say that everyone folds to us, we fold, okay. Now next hand, instead of having to go back and re-enter all the information, there's just a next button that moves you to the hijack. And then if you fold that one or you push the next button. Say you go all in and they fold, there's a steal button which bumps you up about 2 big blinds and moves you to the next seat. And so you go all the way around the table just pushing next and you'll know exactly what to shove or fold. So check that out if you feel like getting better at that.
How'd you
This is what he does in the 2 weeks when he's not playing poker. That's impressive. Okay, so
it's fantastic. I'm like, so this is my 1-2 game, and he's releasing apps and a book a month. Like, all right, that's cool.
Okay, so you flop the little. You're in the small blind. You got queen of clubs, 10 of spades, and the flop is king jack 9 with the king and 9 of clubs. Okay, so we flop the nutskis. $30 in the pot. What's the cutoff do?
So it's going check from the blinds.
So you check right off the bat? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering about this one.
Okay, what are you thinking on this one, Jonathan? Are you leading out here? Are you checking or?
How many people are in this pot?
3.
You and 3 others, or you and 2 others?
Me and 2 others. So myself, the big blind, and the cutoff.
I'm just checking every time because this should be very good for pre-flop raising range.
Yeah. I go ahead and check here. The guy in the cutoff knows his ranges. He knows that this definitely favors him. And so it goes check, and then cutoff bets 17 into 30. So it comes back to me. I feel like it's a pretty standard sizing for him. I call, and the big blind actually comes along as well, which brings the pot into $81 heading to the turn.
Okay. Would you ever raise this when the cutoff bets out here, Jonathan?
Probably, and the reason is because this, like I just said, this board should be very good for the pre-flop raiser's range, meaning he's going to have something, especially when he bets into two players. So I think you can just go ahead and start getting money into the pot. If your opponent's going to be very good and will fold out stuff like top pair bad kicker to the check raise, because he probably should. If he's going to fold stuff like top pair, then you probably don't want to check raise. But I don't think many people are folding top pairs in $1, $2 games. So I would have.
Yeah, so that could be weird.
What sizing would you use? Would you make it like 38, 42, something in that ballpark, or
Probably smaller.
okay,
Probably like. He bet. How much did you say?
17.
17.
Oh, 17. I'm sorry. 42 is small. So, yeah, something like that.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Okay.
All right, cool. Yeah, I was wondering about the raising it on the flop. Could be the way to go here.
So you typically want to be
obviously-
raising with your value hands when it's easy for your opponents to have something as well. If they can't really have anything, like say you have top set on 7-4-2, well, you probably don't want to be check raising. But here, it's so easy for them to have something that you probably should go ahead and check raise, assuming they're not thinking so much about your range and are more concerned with their exact hand strength. And the reason for this is because notice if you call, it's going to go check, check, check on the turn a lot, and then you maybe get one river bet in. Whereas when you check raise, you can somewhat easily get however much money you want into the pot by the river. You get to drive the action and get additional bets in the pot.
Kind of shows how you're all over it because the turn does go check, check, check.
Well, so
What's
think
the
about
turn?
it. Put yourself in that guy's shoes. Like, let's say you have King 8 or King 10 on this board, and you value bet the flop, and you get called. Well, you got called by multiple people. You're just trying to get to showdown now, right?
Yeah.
So the only time he's going to continue betting
Yeah,
is when
you
he has
take
a
that
really
free
good
card.
hand. And notice if he has a really good hand, you would have just gotten all the money in on the flop when he's drawing nearly dead. And say he does have a hand like King Jack, and they decide to put a queen or a 10 on the turn. Maybe now you don't stack the guy if you just call the flop.
Right. So raising that flop's actually a pretty great spot. All right, solve the hand.
Okay.
Turn comes ace of clubs. Yeah, next hand. All right, cool. So the turn was the ace of clubs. So not a terrible card, not a great card. It does go checked around. Just changes the straight I have, gives me the nut flush draw. Also puts a flush out there for anyone else.
I'm sorry, you said an ace or an eight?
Ace. Sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's
So ace of
actually not a
clubs.
very good card for you because now if they did have a king, they're not going to be putting much more money in the pot. Some people improved to two pairs, which is obviously great, but
And third club out
I don't
there.
think you're loving it. You'd much rather the turn be a 2 or a 7 or anything besides an ace, really. An ace, a queen, and 10. Ace, a queen, 10 are all pretty bad cards and that you're not going to get paid, and you really don't want to see a king, a jack, or a 9.
Yeah, it was interesting. It did obviously it slows everything down because it went checked round, and then the river. It was just I hate the river card. It comes out the king of spades.
Yep.
Yeah, so I let this one get away definitely, and then the river. After everyone checks through, river. This is just a play afterwards. I really hated is I actually let out, and immediately it was like as soon as I let go of the chips, I'm like, what are you doing?
Oops.
It was just one of those ones like trying to pull them back. I'm like, that's such a bad spot. And so yeah, I let out. So pot's 81. I let out 40 and got a call and immediately a ship from the cutoff.
I don't necessarily hate
And-
the river lead because if you are against someone who has two pair, they're definitely going to call you. Well,
Yeah.
I guess two pair now is not so good. If they have an ace, they're going to call you most likely. Or do you think people are going to be folding out an ace if you bet the river?
These games are typically. I feel like most aces. Anyone who I feel like the cutoff's always folding an ace there. And the big blind's a bit of an unknown. I wouldn't be surprised if he calls an ace. I think that absolutely the cutoff will fold an ace there. Because you're just not beating anything.
Okay, and so then do you think that if people have a king, they're going to raise you on the river, or do you think they're just always going to call?
King in that spot. Again, with the 3 flush, and there's a straight draw out there, in that spot I can see just getting flat in these games. I can see getting a flat there. So when the big blind flats, I'm thinking he probably has a king. And then the cutoff ships.
Yeah, I mean you have an easy fold at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just folded pretty quickly there and just trying to sneak my 40 back into my stack.
I'm okay. I'm actually okay with value betting here because you would think a lot of people would value bet 2 pair themselves on the turn. So
Yeah,
you're
you
not
don't want to
so
see
concerned about
club
that.
with
The problem is
board
that if they have a king on the river, they're going to value bet that themselves anyway. So you're probably going to get roughly the same amount of money in the pot when you're good. And when you are not good, you always get... You never get bluffed by checking is what it amounts to. When you check and someone bets, you can easily call. But if you bet and get raised, well, then you have to fold. So maybe you miss out on a little bit of value from an ace by checking. But in exchange for that, you make it to where you just never get bluffed by king, queen or something like that. A hand that someone raises in an overvaluing way.
Yeah. I like that.
So it depends on your opponents. If you think they're just virtually never going to bluff you, well, then I think value betting's fine because a king is always going to call you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of lean towards, like, after you said that, I definitely lean towards checking next. Like you said, you're always getting the king to come out and lead, and you just don't put yourself in this spot. Like, it was an easy fold. It was one of those kind of fold spots. And as soon as cut off ships, I was straight out of there. And funnily enough, big blind actually did call with an ace, which I found
Wow.
kind of, yeah.
That's a guy you want in your game.
Absolutely. He just called with an ace, and he kind of sat there for a while. He tanks, and then he side calls, and he's like, "Oh, I've got an ace." And like, that's just never good. And cutoff shows a boat. He flopped jacks. So if I raise there, I raise the flop, it's getting in. Sure, on that spot, it's a bit of a cooler in that spot. But yeah, the big blind call there with an ace was you're just never beating anything.
Well, it's good for you. The money moves from the left to the right.
Yes. Yeah, it's good.
Right on. Do you have any others, Chris? Do you have time for one more, Jonathan? Or
Sure.
Okay.
Go through. There's that one I ran through Steve the other day. With that.
Oh yeah, I'd be interested to get your opinion on this, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot. I find I'm keen to see what happens here. So, we had queen. We've got queen 10 in the cutoff. So we're just playing queen 10 every hand by the looks of it. Queen 10 off, cutoff. It's 4-handed again, and I raise here to 10. Get the fold from. It's just the standard raise in that game.
So just
raise to 10.
So you say it's a standard raise. What does that matter that it is the standard raise? Like why not make a different raise size if you think a different raise size is better?
We found from this that basically 7 and lower it feels similar to limping. In the fact that you just get everyone just calls.
What's wrong with that?
For some reason, not wanting to play queen 10 4 ways.
I think it's okay if people are going to be calling you with 9-8 and ace-2 and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a pretty big fan of not making huge raises because huge raises cut down on your post-flop playability. If you look at all of the biggest winners online, the vast majority of them are raising to 3 big blinds or less across the board, and a lot of them are min-raising pretty much everything, especially in full ring, because you want to minimize the amount you lose when you run into a big hand, and you're going to run into a big hand way more often in full ring than 6-handed. Sure. And you probably want to be modeling your game off the biggest winners, because if they're the biggest winners and they're winning by making a bunch of min-raises, then they're probably doing something right.
Then maybe we should do what they're doing.
I mean, that's generally what I try to do. I try to figure out why the best players in the world are doing whatever they're doing, and try to implement that into my game. So I'm not a big fan of the
It's
big wins
definitely
at all. I
something.
actually discussed this a bit in the small stakes cash game book that I wrote, Strategies for Beating Small Stakes Poker Cash Games. And a lot of people disagree. They think this is the standard raise for my table. So imagine at your table, everyone was making it $44 pre-flop. Is that just what you're going to start doing?
It's a good point. I definitely find it's a difference between online and live. Is that live, most tables, at least most tables here, even including the 5-5, the standard seems to be 5x, and like online, around the late position button, I'm rating 2.2. Standard's about 3. It definitely was something which gets my attention. It's a good point. You don't really need to jump on the back of it.
I mean, you always just want to ask yourself, why am I doing what I'm doing? And if your answer is because that's what everyone else at my table is doing, you have to realize that most people who are playing $1, $2 at the casino are likely somewhat new to poker. Or they're just not very good because they will have moved up if they are very good, right? So why do you want to model your pre-flop strategy off what these players are doing?
That's pretty well put.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so instead, try to model your game off people who are doing very well. And of course, things don't necessarily translate perfectly because a lot of the players who are beating, the biggest stakes online are also doing different things against their specific opponents. But at the same time, I think it's very good to try to copy those players and try to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And the problem you run into is when you're playing the smallest stakes, the people who are winning at the smallest stakes are often not good enough to win at the higher stakes. And that means that you end up copying people who are just not that good at poker. And I mean, I know whenever I sat down and played the $1-2 games at Borgata in preparation for that book, I just made it $5 or $6 every time pre-flop when there were no limpers, and I'd get 4 or 5 callers, and that's perfectly fine because you don't have to win those pots very often to win a huge amount of money, and your opponents are going to pay you off very poorly, what it amounts to. A lot of players in the small stakes games cannot fold top pair, and you want them in there whenever you have any real post-flop playability. All right, so anyway.
Okay. Queen 10 off, you make it 10. What are the suits in the hand?
Yeah.
Is it relevant?
No, not for this one. Actually, the only one is the 10 of hearts. So it was Queen X 10 of hearts. That'll come into it.
Okay, so you raise the 10 from the
And,
cutoff.
yeah, so
What do the button, small blind, and big blind do?
Button, small blind, fold, big blind, calls. And this is the same villain from before, so probably the best player at the table.
Okay, so we go to the flop with 21 in the pot. You're heads up with the big blind, who's the guy from the previous hand, the heads up specialist. Okay.
Yes. Alright, the flop comes Queen 7-7.
Queen 7-7. And you said the 10 of hearts is relevant, so...
Yeah, it's a 7 hearts. It comes in more on the turn, I'd say.
So there's one heart out there.
So it's just Queen 7-7. One heart out there. Queen 7-7, no draws. Pretty safe board there. Checked from the big blind, and I make it 13 into 21, and he flats.
What are you thinking here, Jonathan?
I don't think it matters so much what you do on this flop. I mean, you can bet for value, you can check behind for, to try to get to showdown very easily whenever you can call 2 more bets. So I don't know. I don't think it matters so much. Do whatever you want. You typically want to be betting versus players who are very rarely going to check raise, and you want to be checking versus players who may decide to check raise or fight very aggressively for the pot.
All right.
Okay. So we got 47 in the pot. Okay.
Yep. One thing which is known, that's what I was talking to you, Steve, about, was on that flop, after he's checked to me, I bet 13, he tanks for a while, and it's really unusual. So I'm not huge into live reads personally, but for this one, I just found it was very unusual to me, the fact that this guy, he knows all his decisions quite well. He doesn't ever tank. He's pretty vocal when people do. and then on this Queen 7-7 board, a pretty safe board, he actually tanks for quite a bit before calling 13. And at the time, I figured I've played a lot with this guy. He's a friend of mine, plays there most nights. And at that point, I'm pretty much taking sevens out of his range. He's never, just from my experience playing with him, I feel like he's never playing a seven in that way. Like, he's never wasting time with that decision. I just found that particular spot kind of unusual for him.
Okay.
So which hands do you
Anyway.
think he's going to go into this weird tank call with? And what should that make you do on the turn?
Weird tank call for me is him probably going to run some big lines at some point. So he's going to run. There's going to be a big street potentially, depending on how this runs out. I feel like he's kind of setting up, basically thinking through his plan for the entire hand. That said, I feel he's going to be doing it primarily there, working out my range and working out a bluff range for himself. I feel like he doesn't often. Obviously, a queen can only be a small part of his range, given we block it there. Sevens, I just personally feel like he's never doing that. It could be a mid pair. Eights through tens there. I feel like Jack's good. 3-bet pre. Aces, kings. Steve and I talked about this a bit. Whether he 3-bets, how often he just flats in the big blind in this spot with aces and kings. Personally, I don't think it's very often that he'll ever do that. He's aggressive at the best of times, let alone when it's four-handed. And it's a relatively dry board, so I feel like it could be in that middle range of eights, nines, tens. Maybe he's looking at floating a couple ace X's, some of like the low wheel aces.
Yeah, I think you're most likely looking at some of those marginal-ish hands. I generally agree with all that.
Yeah.
So no. However, it's either one of those very marginal hands or it's a nut hand that he's just losing his mind with. And you have to be careful making assumptions about players if you don't actually know something. You can't say, "Oh, this guy would never do this with trips," but maybe he would. Like, have you ever not seen him do this, or have you seen him do this in the past at all? And if the answer to that's no, then you really shouldn't assume too much about it. But it probably means something. And if it polarizes his range one way or the other, you usually want to be checking down with your marginal made hands like this. Or at least check the turn and then probably value bet the river.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the line I should be taking here is checking that turn. So the turn comes out 8 of hearts. 47 in the pot, turn comes out 8 of hearts, and he checks it around to me again. I think here probably the best move is, like you said, to check it through there. Because it's not often we're really going to be looking for 3 streets with Queen 10 on that board. Like, it's
just check.
Going to get messy. Sorry?
Yeah, just check for sure. Happily.
Yeah,
checking.
and that's probably that's a mistake here is putting, especially against someone who I know is an aggressive opponent. I think checking here is just always the way to go. So with that said,
your reason, Jonathan, is keep his bluffs in and let him bluff the ace high on the river.
Yeah, and also just don't open yourself up to getting outplayed in any ridiculous way by betting the turn and getting check raised or anything like that. You have a hand that can very easily call a river bet pretty much every time. So I think that you're going to randomly be against some hands that you are losing money to, and I don't even know if you're getting 3 streets of value from the various junky part of his range.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we can get 3 streets there, so I think checking behind here is probably the way to go. In hindsight, however, I did go ahead and bet that, and did face a check raise on the turn.
What was your bet?
Yeah.
We bet 30 into 47. It's probably more on the big side there. And opens us up. Get check raised to 75.
Okay.
Well, so I don't have an answer to this. This is where you ideally had some clue what to do whenever you made the bet on the turn.
Yeah, this is one where when I get check raised here, I did think this through, and I kind of went with my my feeling. In hindsight, the only hand I missed when I was going through his range of what he does this with, because I don't feel like he does this here with a queen often. I feel like he's, again, after flop, I didn't feel like he particularly had a 7 in his range, or many 7s at all. The only hand I really missed going back through was he can quite easily do this with 8s, because he's turned the boat there, he can get some value there. It does make sense for him he can happily call and then try and lead river, but I think this is probably the best way with his 8s.
I think this
Other
guy's
than
just
that,
going to
there's
show
just
you
not a
a
hot...
every time. A 7 or a bluff. I
Sorry?
think he's just super polarized to
Yeah.
trips or nothing. And this is where you ideally need to have a very clear idea when you bet the turn what you're going to be doing.
And this is what happened is, so he raises 75, and I figure at this point, after that, he's still got about another 100 behind. And I figure if I call this is probably the point of the hand. If I call this, he's shipping most rivers, if not all. And so basically, if I call this, I'm going to have to be willing to call another 100 onto the river. And it puts me in kind of a tricky spot, so that's why I do like the checking behind, like you said. Ends up calling because I feel pretty much what you said. It's very polarized. I didn't personally feel at the time he has 7s there, so I feel like he's running a bluff here, and I call that, and the river comes down the Jack of Diamonds.
Okay, so the board now is the flop was Queen 7-7 with 1 heart. The turn was the 8 of hearts, and the river's the Jack of Diamonds. So if he picked up a back door for whatever reason on the turn, then he missed it unless it was 9-10.
He's bricked it.
Okay.
Yeah. It's 9-10 there, and I was discussing the hand with him afterwards, and the only problem I have, and the reason I mentioned the 10 of hearts, is I feel like it's one of his better bluffing cards for him to have in there. So with me having it, it does take out some of his bluffs. You could have, obviously 9-10 got there, but any Jack 10s there which suited on the turn, any Jack 10s there which he's floated the flop with, and then tried to make some kind of play on the turn. Any of a lot of his 10s there which he can bluff with, I've removed.
Okay.
And then obviously river, he just ships straight into me.
He bets about 100 into 197.
Yeah. River he just ships there, and I kind of, like I said, on the turn, I knew as soon as calling that most river cards he's just going to ship there, and so if I call the turn there, I kind of have to call this river, I feel like. I do have a good blocker in the fact I've blocked the 9-10. That said, it still wasn't my favorite river card. I ended up calling it off, and it was like I said, he just had ace high. He just marks it immediately, just says, "Oh, you're good." Didn't even see his hand. He just said he had ace high. There's that hand and the queen 10 hand before, where I definitely felt there were spots where it can be played better, and this one is probably the check back on the turn. I think it just put me into a kind of awkward spot there.
Well, so if you think the guy's going to be bluffing you a ton, then clearly you just should bet and let the guy bluff you.
Yeah, because then you get his whole stack
Yeah.
like you did here
right?
instead of a $40 bet on the river.
Right. It's not actually even a tough spot. It's more of a fine spot because you're happy enough to put this money in, and you realize this guy's going to be bluffing you way more often than he should. So it may feel kind of tough because you do have a bluff catcher, but you think most of your opponent's range is bluffs. The times you want to be checking behind on the turn are when you're not really sure what's going on with his range, which is often the case if you're playing at someone you don't know a ton and he does something kind of abnormal that makes you think something's happening with his range. So, you can go either way in that spot between betting the turn or checking the turn. But if you do bet, you want to have a very clear idea of what you're going to do. You don't want to just find yourself in this area where you're clueless.
Yeah. This particular guy, he's quite aggressive, so it's one of those things of getting into the hand. I knew that there was going to be, he's gonna bluff a lot. He's gonna try and make it difficult. He does it a lot. And it does help the fact that I played a lot of hands with this particular guy. I think against most people at the 1-2 tables in this particular spot, I do end up checking back. I definitely, the check raise and river shove, you can't call them, because in these games, for the most part, that's a 7 every time. There's not a lot of people in these 1-2 games who can run these big bluffs.
Okay.
Yeah, and I totally agree that there are not very many people who do that, and it's good that you made that assumption about your opponents and you recognize that ahead of time so that you could make the call.
I think I was talking to him afterwards and just saying that he's one of the only people who play those games who I can make that call against and who I think is capable of making the play that he did. I felt like it was a very player-specific spot. And it was one of the things I was listening to the podcast with Alex, Steve, and he was talking about really getting to know your player pool when you're playing live, and how important that is.
Yeah.
And it's another element which you take for granted when you're playing online and playing all the hands with HUD. Like it's taking notes of your player pool for you. But it's something which is probably easier to do here, especially because you're seeing the same, 10 to 15 guys every week, and then you mix in the casuals who stumble in on a Friday night. I think that it's been an interesting transition this year, going from primarily online to trying to play more live, because there's just so many new elements for me.
Yeah. Right on. Well, I think we could probably wrap it up here. Thank you for coming on, Jonathan, and thank you for sharing hands, Chris. And if you guys want to get a hold of Jonathan's books, if you want to get a hold of Jonathan, you can go to his website, JonathanLittlePoker.com. If you want to kick back a little bit to the podcast, his books are up on the website at HeadsUpPoker.Poker. Under the Support Us tab, you'll see his books right there. You can spread a little love to Jonathan, spread a little love back to your favorite podcast. We have podcasts every week. Episodes come out every Monday. Start the week off right with a little Heads Up Poker podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at HUPPoker. Follow me, follow Jonathan at Jonathan Little. And you can follow Chris at Chris Green 182. Thank you for tuning in, and here is your weekly motivational speech.
If you don't achieve your dreams, you can still get a lot by trying for it. There's an expression I love: experience is what you get when you don't get what you wanted.
Experience, raw experience, is hands down way more important than knowledge. I mean, think about it. Knowledge goes in one ear and right out the other. We go to seminars, we listen to this so inspiring speech. We get up, we leave, we go home, next morning we wake up, and what do? We make the same mistake. But then, it hits us. It hits us when we experience it. There's no making that mistake again. You know why? Because we felt it. And that's what's so powerful about experience. Experience is physical. I can feel experience, but I can't feel knowledge. It's in one ear and out the other. I can't grasp it. But experience, I feel it. You've been lied to. You've been led to believe that you're supposed to win all the time.